Dracula.
Yeah, it is a name that carries just a ridiculous amount of cultural baggage, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, you say that one single word, and instantly everyone listening is picturing exactly the same thing.
Right.
The cape, the slicked back hair, the castle covered in fog, the bats.
The fake plastic fangs.
Exactly. It is Bram Stoker's monster. It's the ultimate creature of the night, or just, a standard Halloween costume.
Precisely. It is this massive cultural monolith. But monoliths cast really long shadows, and sometimes those shadows hide the actual reality standing right behind them.
Yeah.
Because what if we told you that the monster isn't just some ghost story? That the name actually belongs to a real man who walked the earth or well-stomped across Wallachia in the 15th century.
Right.
And that the reality of his actual life might be more terrifying and definitely more complex than the fiction.
So that is exactly our mission for the deep dive today. We are looking at the man behind the teeth, so to speak. Vlad III. Vlad the Impact, the man of many names.
Right. A man who is a prince, a warlord, a prisoner, and honestly, depending on who you ask, either a completely sadistic psychopath or a misunderstood national hero.
And that tension is really the heart of what we're going to explore today. How exactly does a historical figure become a literal monster?
Right.
Was he just born that way? Was he made that way by extreme trauma? Or was he, in a very modern sense, the victim of a coordinated smear campaign?
A smear campaign that involved 15th century woodcuts, which is just absolutely fascinating to me. We have a massive stack of sources here to help us figure this out for you guys.
Right.
We're talking everything from German propaganda pamphlets to Russian tales of what they called evil wisdom.
Yeah, the source material is wild.
And even some very recent scientific studies that actually analyze the man's physical tears, which we will get to.
Oh, we are definitely going to unpack all of that. We are talking about a brutal buffer zone between two global superpowers, biological warfare happening way before the Geneva Convention, and a family dynamic that honestly makes Succession look like a friendly sitcom.
So let's just get right into it. We have to start with the name right. Because Dracula isn't just a cool nickname that Bram Stoker invented out of thin air. It meant something very specific to Vlad.
It did. And to understand the son, you really have to look at the father. Vlad III was obviously the son of Vlad II. And Vlad II was a really complex figure in his own right. In roughly 1408, he was actually inducted into the Order of the Dragon.
The Order of the Dragon, which sounds exactly like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, but this was a very serious, real-world political thing.
Oh, very serious. It was a militant fraternity founded by Sigismund of Luxembourg, who was the King of Hungary, and later the Holy Roman Emperor. The entire purpose of this knightly order was to halt the advance of the Ottoman Empire into Europe.
So this is a crusading order.
Exactly. And their insignia was literally a dragon lying prone with its tail coiled around its own neck.
Okay, so Vlad's dad gets inducted into this secret society of elite knights.
Yes, and because of that prestigious induction, he earns the moniker Vlad Dracul. Now, in medieval Romanian, Dracul meant the dragon.
Okay, so Vlad Dracul literally translates to Vlad the Dragon.
Exactly. Now enter our main subject, his son Vlad III. In the Slavonic language that was widely used in their court at the time, the genitive form, the form that indicates son, adds an e or an e at the end of the word.
Oh, I see.
So Vlad Dracul becomes Vlad Dracula.
Dracula, son of the dragon.
That is the literal translation, yes. But here is the massive linguistic twist that really haunts his entire legacy. In modern Romanian, and even starting to evolve back in his own time, the word Dracul shifted in meaning. It didn't just mean dragon anymore.
What did it mean?
It came to mean the devil.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so depending on how you translate it or when you translate it, he is either the son of the dragon, like this noble knightly defender, or the son of the devil.
Right. And as we go through his life today, you're going to see that he walked a very fine razor's edge between those two identities. He fully embraced the ferocity of the dragon, but his enemies, they absolutely saw the devil.
It really seems like his childhood set the perfect stage for that devil side to eventually come out. Because I think we tend to picture princes as having these cushy, pampered lives, right? But Vlad's upbringing was, well, let's just say, incredibly stressful.
Stressful is an understatement. It was profoundly traumatic. You really have to understand the geography of the region here to get it. Wallachia, which is part of modern-day Romania, was a buffer state.
In the middle.
Exactly. To the north, you have the Kingdom of Hungary, which is Catholic and Western-leaning. To the south, you have the rapidly expanding Ottoman Empire, which is an Islamic Eastern powerhouse. Wallachia is literally the ham in the sandwich.
And everybody wants a bite of the ham.
Precisely. So Vlad's father, Vlad Dracul, was constantly trying to balance these two massive powers so his country wouldn't get crushed. In 1442, he gets called to a supposedly diplomatic meeting with the Ottoman Sultan Murad II. He takes his two sons, Vlad, and his much younger brother, Radu, with him.
And it is a trap.
It is a total trap. The Sultan arrests all three of them. He eventually releases the father so he can go back and rule Wallachia and keep the peace, but he keeps the two boys. Vlad, who is about 11 or 12 at this point, and Radu are held as hostages.
This is the classic medieval insurance policy.
Exactly. The Sultan tells the father, if you misbehave or side with Hungary, your boys die. And this was not an empty threat. They were imprisoned in the fortress of Awagas.
I can't even imagine.
They lived under the constant daily threat of execution. And the sources say not just execution, they were specifically told they would be butchered if their father rebelled.
Imagine being 12 years old, stuck in a stone fortress hundreds of miles from home, knowing your actual life depends entirely on the shifting political decisions your dad makes. That has to completely mess you up.
It fundamentally rewired his brain. But here is a really interesting divergence in the family. The younger brother Radu actually adapted to it. Yeah, he became known later as Radu the Handsome.
Huh.
He integrated into the Ottoman court. He actually befriended the Sultan's son, the future Mehmed the Conqueror. Radu converted culturally, if not totally religiously, to the Ottoman way of life.
But Vlad did not.
Vlad absolutely resisted. He hated his captivity. He hated his captors. He grew deeply resentful, suspicious, and incredibly hard. He learned to speak fluent Turkish. He meticulously studied their military tactics and their politics, but he never assimilated. He just stored all of that knowledge up as fuel for later.
And while they are locked up in this fortress, things back home in Wallachia go terribly, terribly wrong.
Horribly wrong. In 1447, the Hungarian regent John Hunyadi invades Wallachia because he suspects Vlad's father is secretly playing both sides, which, to be fair, he was.
Right, you have to survive. But this invasion leads to the death of Vlad's father, doesn't it?
Yes, Vlad Dracul is assassinated. But it is the death of Vlad's eldest brother, Marcia, that is particularly haunting. The historical records vary slightly on the exact details, but the consensus across the sources is incredibly brutal.
What happened to him?
Marcia was betrayed by his own Wallachian nobles, the boyars and the local merchants of Tergoviite. They captured him, blinded him, and buried him alive.
Buried alive. That is a literal nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
So Vlad is sitting in an Ottoman prison cell, finding out that his father is dead and his big brother was tortured to death by their own people, the people they were supposed to rule.
Right. And this completely crystallizes Vlad's worldview going forward. Trust no one, period. Especially not the boyars and the nobility. In his mind, they are inherently treacherous. They killed his family. This specific trauma is the seed of all the terror that is going to come later.
So eventually Vlad does get out of captivity. And obviously he wants his throne back.
He does. He actually has a very brief stint on the throne in 1448, which is ironically supported by the Ottomans because they wanted to use him as a puppet.
Right.
But it only lasts a month or two. He gets chased out by Hungarian-backed forces. We usually call that his false start.
The dress rehearsal for the main event. Because the reign that actually gave us all the legends starts a bit later.
Yeah. 1456. That is the crucial year. He returns with Hungarian support this time around, ironically enough. He kills the current ruler, Vladislav II, and finally secures the throne. He is now the voivode of Wallachia.
And he wastes absolutely no time once he has the power. He has this underlying philosophy on rule that is, well, it's chilling. There is a specific letter he wrote that really sums it up perfectly.
Yes, the famous letter to the burghers of Braiov. He wrote, quote, "When a man or a prince is strong and powerful, he can make peace as he wants to. But when he is weak, a stronger one will come and do what he wants to him."
Do what he wants to him. That is explicitly the voice of a man who was a hostage, a man who felt utterly powerless as a kid and simply decided never again.
Exactly. He viewed fear not just as an unfortunate byproduct of ruling, but as the essential primary tool of stability. And his very first order of business was getting revenge against those boyars who betrayed his father and brother.
This is the famous Easter Feast massacre.
The Bloody Easter. It really sounds like something straight out of Game of Thrones, but this is documented history. He invites the nobility, the boyars, to a massive feast. These are the exact people who, in his eyes, tortured and killed his brother.
The audacity to sit and eat with them.
Right. They eat, they drink, they celebrate, and then Vlad drops the hammer.
What exactly does he do?
He has his loyal guards arrest every single one of them. The older nobles, the ones who were likely directly responsible for the betrayal years ago, he has them impaled right then and there outside the feast.
Just immediately.
Immediately. But the younger ones, the able-bodied nobles and their wives, he doesn't kill right away. He marches them out of the city and up into the harsh mountains.
This is the death march to Ponori, right?
Yes, he forces this pampered elite class to march miles to the site of Ponari Castle, which was essentially a crumbling ruin at the time, high up on a cliff. He forces them to rebuild it with their bare hands. He works them to death. The chronicles specifically say they worked until their fancy clothes literally fell off their bodies in rags and they died of exhaustion and exposure. He used the very people who killed his brother to build his own personal fortress of safety.
That is a level of poetic justice that is also just incredibly, unbelievably cruel. He is effectively purging the state, replacing the old, untrustworthy elite with his own people who owe absolutely everything to him.
It is a total purge. He is consolidating absolute, undisputed power. But he didn't just target the Wallachian nobles. He also got into a massive escalating conflict with the Saxons.
Okay, the Saxons. For our listeners, these are the German merchants living in the neighboring region of Transylvania, right? Why did he have such a huge beef with them?
It started as an economic war that eventually turned bloody. The Saxons were extremely wealthy and powerful. They basically controlled all the lucrative trade routes in the region. Vlad wanted to protect his own Wallachian merchants, so he imposed strict protectionist policies.
With tariffs.
Exactly. He raised taxes on the Saxons and legally limited where they were allowed to sell their goods inside Wallachia.
And I'm guessing the wealthy Saxon merchants didn't just smile and say, sure, whatever you say, Vlad.
Not at all. They retaliated the way rich merchants do. They started heavily funding and supporting rival claimants to Vlad's throne. They backed a guy named Dan III, and they even backed Vlad's own half-brother, Vlad the Monk.
Oh, wow.
They basically sent a message saying, we are going to fund a literal coup to get rid of you if you mess with our money.
And as we know, Vlad does not take criticism or threats very well.
No, he does not.
Yeah.
He viewed their political funding as absolute treason. So he took his army and raided the Saxon villages in Transylvania, primarily around the cities of Braiov and Sibiu. He pillaged, he burned, and he impaled them by the thousands.
And this right here is a really crucial point for anyone listening who wants to understand the Dracula myth. Because these Saxon merchants had access to a brand new technology that Vlad didn't really care about. The printing press.
That is the absolute key connection to the monster myth. The Saxons were highly literate, they were wealthy, and most importantly, they were plugged into the burgeoning German printing hubs.
Right.
When Vlad attacked them, they didn't just fight back with swords, they fought back with paper and ink. They started printing and mass distributing these sensational pamphlets describing Vlad's horrific atrocities. These became known historically as the German stories.
They were basically the world's very first true crime or horror bestsellers.
Essentially, yes. They sold like crazy, and they painted him as a one-dimensional monster, a literal antichrist who drank blood and laughed at suffering. And while we know Vlad certainly committed massive atrocities, we really have to remember that a huge chunk of what Western Europe learned about him came directly from the people he was actively warring with.
Exactly. It's important to be objective here. We aren't taking sides on 15th century trade disputes, but we have to point out that the source material is heavily biased propaganda. But at the same time, we can't just dismiss the atrocities entirely. I mean, his historical nickname is literally the Impaler. He didn't get that name for his woodworking skills. Let's talk about the impalement itself. Why that specific method? Because practically speaking, it seems so inefficient and messy if you just want to execute someone.
It wasn't about efficiency, not at all. If you want to kill an enemy efficiently, you just cut off their head. Impalement was pure theater. It was a tool of maximum psychological warfare.
Can you walk us through the actual mechanics of it? I know it is incredibly gruesome, but I think it really explains the terror he commanded.
It is deeply gruesome. The stake itself was usually a thick, rounded, and greased wooden pole, not a sharp spear, but rounded. It was typically inserted through the rectum or sometimes the abdomen.
Okay.
It was then forcefully driven up through the body using a mallet. But the executioners were highly trained to carefully avoid piercing vital organs like the heart or the liver.
Because they didn't want the victim to die right away.
Exactly. The stake would eventually exit through the mouth or the back of the neck. Then the stake was hoisted upright and planted in the ground.
So they're fully alive while hoisted up there in the air.
Fully conscious, often for hours, sometimes for several days. Gravity would just slowly, agonizingly pull the body further down the greased stake. It was a slow, excruciating public death. And Vlad was meticulous about it. He would arrange the stakes in massive geometric patterns, often concentric circles right outside the city walls.
Gosh, that is just...
And there was a strict hierarchy to it as well. High-ranking nobles or wealthy merchants were purposely put on much longer stakes so their bodies would hang higher in the air than the commoners.
Wow.
Even in the moment of torturous death, he maintained their social class, but he used it to completely humiliate them.
It creates a visual that you just cannot unsee. If you were a peasant thinking about stealing a loaf of bread, or a noble thinking about starting a rebellion, and you walk out of your town and see that
You stay in line. It is what they called the Forest of the Impaled. We will get to the most famous historical instance of that forest a little later, but it truly became his absolute signature.
But the primary sources go way beyond just impalement. There are some really specific, almost creatively cruel atrocities mentioned in these texts, like the famous turban incident.
Right, this one appears in the records of a historian named Antonio Bonfini. The story goes that a group of Ottoman messengers came to Vlad's court. They bowed respectfully, but they did not remove their turbans.
Because it's a religious and cultural garment.
Right. Vlad asked them why they kept their heads covered in his presence. They politely replied that it is not our custom to remove them even for our own sultan.
And Vlad says, well, let me help you with that.
He supposedly said, I wish to strengthen your custom. And he immediately ordered his guards to literally nail the turbans to the men's skulls using 3 iron spikes each.
That is, I mean, on one hand, it is just horrific violence. But on the other hand, it has this twisted, terrifying logic to it. You won't take them off, fine, they stay on forever.
It is sending a very clear diplomatic message. Your customs mean absolutely nothing in my country. My authority here is absolute. And there are plenty of other stories in the pamphlets, too. Like the cauldron.
The cauldron. I don't think I know that one.
The German pamphlets specifically describe a giant device where victims were boiled alive, but the cauldron had a special custom lid with holes cut into it for their heads.
Oh my God.
So their bodies would boil, but their heads stuck out so they would remain conscious and screaming for as long as possible while their bodies dissolved.
It literally sounds like a trap from a Saw movie.
It really does. And then, of course, there is the famous woodcut image. I'm sure many of you listening have seen it online or in documentaries. It shows Vlad dining outdoors. He is sitting at a large table enjoying a lavish meal, and he is entirely surrounded by a thick forest of tall stakes with dying people squirming on them.
That is the famous image where he is sometimes rumored to be dipping his bread into their blood, right?
Yes, but we should clarify that the blood-dipping detail is very likely a later embellishment, a pure legend added to make it spookier. But the core image of him dining among the rotting corpses, that actually completely aligns with his psychological strategy.
So.
It projects a kind of inhuman, indestructible strength. It says, I can comfortably eat my lunch while you scream and die right next to me because I am the law, and your suffering doesn't even make me flinch.
Now, you mentioned earlier that there are the German stories and then there are the Slavic stories. How do those two sets of sources differ? Because I feel like looking at both tells us a lot about how differently he was perceived by different cultures.
It is a totally fascinating contrast. The German stories, which were written by his literal enemies, portray him simply as a demented psychopath, a sadist who killed purely for sick pleasure.
Right.
But the Slavic chronicles, which largely came out of Russia a bit later, paint a very different picture. They actually called him evil-wise.
Evil-wise. I think the word is zlomadry.
Yes, zlomadry. They freely acknowledge his extreme cruelty. They don't hide the impalements, but they frame it as the harsh, necessary actions of a strong ruler establishing ultimate order in a chaotic world. There is a very famous anecdote in the Slavic tradition about the Golden Cup.
Oh, I love this story. It really messes with your perception of him.
It does. So Vlad supposedly placed a solid gold-heavy cup right at the public water fountain in the very center of the town square in his capital. Anyone walking by could use this gold cup to drink the water.
Okay.
But the one strict rule was you drink and then you put the cup exactly back where you found it. You do not steal it. Or else.
And in the middle of a medieval city with rampant poverty and no police force.
That solid gold cup stayed right there. For his entire reign, apparently that immensely valuable cup sat completely unguarded in the open and no one ever touched it.
Because everyone knew what would happen.
Because the absolute paralyzing fear of his punishment was so deep that petty crime virtually ceased to exist. To the Slavic chroniclers, this was the tangible upside of his reign of terror. He created a society of perfect strict order, but he achieved it through perfect horror.
It really complicates the picture of who he was. He isn't just killing for fun in a basement. He is killing publicly with a clear structural purpose. A terrible, bloody purpose, but a purpose nonetheless.
Absolutely.
And nowhere is that strategic purpose clearer than in his massive war with the Ottomans. Because this is the ultimate David versus Goliath part of the story.
It really is epic in scale. You have the Ottoman Empire led by Sultan Mehmed II. This is Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who successfully took the impregnable city of Constantinople. He is arguably the most powerful ruler in the entire world at this moment.
And then you have Vlad ruling this tiny little principality of Wallachia.
Exactly. And Vlad just decides, you know what? I am done paying rent.
He just ghosts the most powerful empire on earth.
Essentially, yes. In 1459, Vlad officially stops paying the massive annual tribute, the tax, to the Sultan. And even more provocatively, he stops sending the required quota of Wallachian boys to be raised as janissaries in the Ottoman army.
Which is just a massive slap in the face. Mehmed must have been absolutely furious.
He was. So Mehmed initially tries to handle it quietly. He sends a senior commander named Hamza Bey with a small specialized force to basically trick and capture Vlad. It is supposed to look like a diplomatic envoy, but it is actually an ambush.
But you really do not try to ambush the absolute master of ambushes.
No, you don't.
Please.
Vlad had his spies. He knew exactly what the Ottomans were planning, so he ambushes the ambushers. He captures Hamza Bey and his entire diplomatic retinue. And this is where Vlad's twisted sense of hierarchy comes right back into play.
Oh boy.
He impales all of them, the whole group. But for Hamza Bey, the senior commander, Vlad specifically orders his men to cut the tallest tree in the forest and build the highest stake of all.
A literal promotion in death.
Exactly. He puts Hamza Bey on a massive, towering stake that looms over all the others, so absolutely everyone can clearly see his high rank.
So now Vlad hasn't just stopped paying taxes. He has violently murdered the Sultan's personal envoys and mocked them. This is now total, all-out war.
Total war. Mehmed II gathers a catastrophic army. The historical sources vary, but they say it was massive, second in size only to the army that took Constantinople. Some estimates put it at around 150,000 fighting men.
And what does Vlad have?
Vlad has maybe 30,000, mostly peasant conscripts.
The math is horribly not in his favor, so how on earth does he fight back?
He doesn't fight a conventional pitch battle. He knows he can't. If he meets the Ottomans on an open field, he gets wiped out in an hour. So he uses extreme scorched earth tactics.
Meaning he burns his own country down.
He burns the crops to ash. He poisons every single water well. He slaughters his own livestock so the invading Ottomans can't eat them. He completely evacuates the villages, sending all the women and children deep into the unforgiving Carpathian Mountains.
Wow.
So when this massive Ottoman war machine marches across the Danube into Wallachia, they don't find a lush country to conquer. They find a blackened, empty wasteland. There is zero food, there's no clean water, and there is no shelter from the elements.
They're basically marching into a hungry, thirsty ghost country.
Exactly. And then, while they are starving and exhausted, Vlad plays his wildest, most terrifying card: biological warfare.
This is the aha moment that completely blew my mind when we were going through the source notes. Biological warfare in the 1400s.
It is horrifyingly brilliant and way ahead of its time. Vlad knew that highly contagious diseases like leprosy, tuberculosis, and the bubonic plague were currently rampant in certain pockets of the region.
Right.
So he actively rounded up people who were infected with these deadly diseases. He paid them or otherwise heavily incentivized them to dress up in Turkish clothing and sneak into the sprawling Ottoman encampments at night.
He literally used his own sick citizens as human bioweapons.
He did. He encouraged them to mingle closely with the enemy soldiers, to share food, to spread the germs as widely as possible. It created absolute panic in the ranks. The Ottomans weren't just fighting a guerrilla army they couldn't see, they were suddenly fighting an invisible, fast-spreading plague.
So the Ottoman army is completely miserable. They are starving, they are thirsty, they are getting sick, and they are terrified of the dark. And then comes the famous night of June 17th, 1462. The night attack at Targoviyite.
This military operation is legendary. Vlad realizes he can never defeat the bulk of the army, but he reasons that if he can cut off the head of the snake, the body will die. He decides to personally assassinate Sultan Mehmed II.
Which sounds like an absolute suicide mission.
Because it basically was. In the dead of night, Vlad takes a highly mobile elite force, maybe a few thousand of his best men, and they brazenly charge directly into the center of the massive Ottoman camp.
Just right past the guards.
They are dressed in stolen Ottoman uniforms. They are speaking fluent Turkish, which Vlad learned as a hostage, remember? They slip past the perimeter and then just start slaughtering.
Complete chaos.
Absolute pitch black chaos. They are slashing through the canvas tents, creating massive confusion. Men are waking up and stabbing each other in the dark. And Vlad's elite unit makes a direct beeline for the royal sector of the camp. Their one and only goal is to find the Sultan's tent and kill Mehmed right then and there.
Do they make it to him?
They get agonizingly close. But in the total confusion of the night attack, they attack the wrong massive tent. They accidentally hit the tents of the viziers, the grand commanders, mistaking their lavish setups for the Sultan's personal quarters.
Oh man, that is a cinematic moment right there. They're slashing through the expensive silk thinking we finally got him, and it is just the wrong guy.
It was a near miss. Mehmed's elite Janissary guards finally managed to rally and form a defense, and Vlad realizes the element of surprise is gone. He has to quickly retreat back into the forest before dawn breaks and they are surrounded.
So he misses the target.
He didn't kill the Sultan, no. But the psychological impact of that night was totally devastating. The Ottomans suddenly realized they weren't safe literally anywhere, not even surrounded by 100,000 of their own men in the very center of their own camp. The voivode could still touch them.
But Mehmed is a conqueror. He keeps marching forward right. He is shaken up, but he is still heading straight for Vlad's capital city, Targoviite. He probably thinks, okay, this Vlad guy is incredibly annoying and dangerous, but I am going to take his city and end this.
And this exact moment leads to the absolute climax of Vlad's psychological war. Mehmed approaches the capital of Targoviite. He expects a massive, brutal siege. But as he gets there, the city gates are wide open.
No guards.
There is zero military resistance. Mehmed rides in. But instead of a functioning city to conquer, he finds the forest.
The forest of the impaled.
The historical chronicles state that it was a concentrated area outside the city that was miles long. They reported 20,000 stakes.
20,000.
And hoisted on them were the rotting bodies of Ottoman prisoners of war, but also Wallachians who Vlad suspected of treason, men, women, and children.
20,000 bodies left in the sun. The sheer smell of that must have been
completely unimaginable. The Byzantine historian Chalco-Condyles specifically wrote that birds had actually made nests inside the exposed entrails of the corpses. It was just an apocalyptic landscape of rotting death.
And what does Mehmed do? Because this is the conqueror of Constantinople. This guy has seen horrible, bloody warfare his entire life.
He is completely stunned. The sources report that he stares out at this horrific, endless sight, and he just says, I cannot take the country of a man who does such terrible things, a man who has such a diabolical understanding of government.
And it's diabolical understanding. He is basically looking at it and saying, you know what, this guy is way crazier than I am. I am out.
He literally turns his massive, undefeated army around. He retreats back south. Vlad, utilizing a tiny fractured army and a whole lot of sharp sticks, successfully turned back the single greatest military empire in the known world. It was a strategic victory, won through pure, unadulterated nightmare fuel.
But unfortunately for Vlad, it is a victory that does not last. Because while Vlad successfully defeated the Sultan, he completely forgot to watch his own back. Or rather, he forgot to watch his brother's back.
Radu.
Radu the Handsome. The younger brother who stayed behind and assimilated with the Ottomans years ago.
Yes, Radu was incredibly smart and highly political. He knew for a fact he could never ever beat his brother Vlad in a straight contest of cruelty or military tactics. So he tried a completely different strategy. Kindness, or at least extreme political pragmatism. The Sultan basically gives Radu an army and says, you go take Wallachia from your maniac brother.
And Radu doesn't start impaling people, right?
No. Radu marches in and goes straight to the surviving Wallachian boyars. These nobles are absolutely terrified of Vlad at this point. And Radu just says, hey, I am Vlad's brother. I have royal blood. I am a legitimate prince. But if you back me and give me the throne, the impaling stops today. The endless war with the Turks stops today, and the lucrative trade routes open back up.
I mean, that is an incredibly compelling sales pitch for a traumatized country. Vote for Radu. No more stakes.
Exactly. And the Wallachian people were just utterly exhausted. They were tired of the constant war, tired of living in absolute fear, tired of the scorched earth ruining their farms. They started defecting to Radu in massive droves. Even some of Vlad's most trusted, loyal generals completely switched sides.
So Vlad isn't actually chased off the throne by the mighty Turkish army. He is chased out by his own younger brother and his own exhausted people.
Yes. So Vlad is forced to flee north into Transylvania. He thinks he can get sanctuary and military help from his old ally, the King of Hungary, Matthias Corvinus.
But Corvinus, well, his politics are complicated to say the least.
Corvinus is the ultimate pragmatist. He had actually taken a massive amount of funding from the Pope, specifically to fight a holy crusade against the Ottomans alongside Vlad. But Corvinus had already spent all that crusade money on other personal things.
Like what?
Western mercenaries, his own lavish court, expanding his borders elsewhere. He absolutely does not want to fight another highly expensive, brutal war in Wallachia just to put Vlad back on a throne.
So what does he do when Vlad shows up asking for the army he was promised?
He frames him. Corvinus suddenly miraculously produces these 3 letters that he claims his guards intercepted. He claims Vlad secretly wrote them to the Ottoman Sultan. The forged letters supposedly say, "Hey, Sultan, sorry about that whole war thing. I will happily switch sides and help you attack Hungary if you just give me my Wallachian throne back."
And historians know these letters are fake, right?
Almost certainly cheap forgeries, yes.
Yeah.
Modern historians have extensively analyzed the text. The Latin grammar is surprisingly clumsy, and Vlad employed very highly educated chancellors who would never write bad Latin. Also, the overall tone and wording is incredibly meek and submissive, totally unlike Vlad's established arrogant voice. And logically, it makes 0 sense. Vlad had literally just burned his own country to the ground and impaled 20,000 people just to fight the Ottomans. Why would he suddenly pivot and propose a submissive alliance?
So Corvinus fakes these letters specifically to show the Pope. He can say, look, Holy Father, I cannot fight the Turks with Vlad. He's actually a secret traitor. I had to arrest him for the good of Christendom.
Precisely. It gives Corvinus the perfect airtight excuse to pocket all the Pope's crusade money without having to actually fight the terrifying Ottoman army. And as a result, Vlad gets quietly thrown into a Hungarian prison.
For 14 years.
14 years locked away at Visgrad Fortress. He is essentially under strict house arrest. And there are these very persistent rumors, really, that even while locked in a tower, he simply could not stop being who he fundamentally was.
Oh, the rat story.
Yes. The local bishop of Eger actually recorded a rumor that Vlad would spend his days catching small rats and mice inside his stone cell. And he would meticulously cut them up or stick them on tiny little splinters of wood.
Just impaling rodents.
He was allegedly impaling mice because he no longer had any people to impale.
That is deeply, deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
It really strongly suggests that his cruelty wasn't just a calculated political policy like we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
It suggests it was an actual deep-seated pathology. He physically needed to do it to feel in control.
Or, and we always have to consider the source, it heavily suggests that his Hungarian captors actively wanted to continue portraying him as a wild, untamed monster even while he was in captivity to justify holding a Christian prince hostage. It is really hard to know the exact psychological truth, for sure.
That makes sense.
But eventually, the geopolitics of Eastern Europe shift yet again. A powerful new prince rises to power in neighboring Moldavia named Stephen the Great. Stephen heavily pressures Corvinus to finally release Vlad because the Ottomans are aggressively advancing again and they desperately need a general who truly scares them.
It's the classic action movie trope. We need the monster back on the wall to fight the bigger monsters.
Basically, yes. But there is a massive religious catch. Vlad was born and baptized Orthodox Christian. Corvinus the king was Catholic. In order to get released and to officially marry into the Hungarian royal family, he marries Corvinus's cousin, Justina. Vlad is forced to formally convert to Catholicism.
Which for a reigning Romanian prince in the highly religious 15th century is an absolutely huge deal. It's almost a fundamental betrayal of his cultural identity.
It was heavily viewed by many of his own Orthodox subjects as total apostasy. From their perspective, he literally sold his soul to the Pope just to buy his political freedom.
But he does get out. He makes his grand comeback.
Yeah.
The Third Reign.
Yes, in 1476. He marches an army back down into Wallachia. He successfully retakes the throne. But it is a very hollow tragedy.
Why?
He is basically a ghost, a relic of the violent past. His local support is incredibly thin. His old loyalists are mostly dead. He manages to rule for maybe 2 volatile months.
And then his death. But even the circumstances of his death are a complete historical mystery.
It happened during a chaotic battle against the Ottomans near Snagov in either late 1476 or early 1477. But the primary accounts vary wildly on how it actually went down. One popular story says a Turkish assassin managed to sneak into his command camp and just stabbed him in the back.
The classic covert assassination.
Right. Another completely different story claims he was bravely surrounded by the advancing Ottoman army and fought fiercely to the bitter end. But the absolute most tragic version, and the one actually recorded by several contemporary Russian sources, is that he was accidentally killed by his own men.
Friendly fire. How does that even happen to a prince?
Mistaken identity. Remember earlier we discussed how Vlad frequently dressed in stolen Turkish armor to confuse the enemy or to go on scouting missions?
Right, the night attack.
Exactly. The story goes that in the frantic heat of this final battle, he rode up to a high hill to strategically survey the fighting, still fully dressed as a Turkish cavalryman. A group of his own Wallachian soldiers saw him, completely thought he was an enemy Ottoman commander trying to flank them, and they rushed up and speared him to death.
Killed by the very army he spent his life building, all because of the exact disguise tactic he relied on to win. That is just, the irony is staggering.
It is. And the final indignity of his life. They didn't even realize who it was until it was too late. Once they did, the Ottomans swooped in and cut off his head. They carefully preserved it in a barrel of local honey. The sugar stops the rapid rotting, and they shipped it all the way to Constantinople.
To Sultan Mehmed.
To Mehmed. The Sultan finally got his ultimate bloody trophy. He proudly put Vlad's severed head on a very high wooden stake right in the middle of the bustling capital city for everyone to gawk at.
He quite literally impaled the impaler.
Poetic justice for the Ottomans, exactly.
But what about the rest of him? His actual body?
That remains one of the greatest archaeological mysteries in Romanian history. Local folk tradition heavily insists he was secretly buried by loyal monks at Snagov Monastery, which is this beautiful, secluded island monastery sitting on a lake near modern Bucharest.
Okay.
But in 1933, a team of archaeologists finally got permission to open the specific tomb in front of the altar where he was supposedly laid to rest.
And what did they find?
It was empty. Well, not totally empty. They found some badly decayed animal bones, specifically horse bones, but absolutely zero trace of Vlad the Impaler.
Horse bones. Was he pranking history from beyond the grave?
It is entirely possible his loyalists secretly moved his body later to protect it from grave robbers or Ottoman sympathizers. Or, more likely, he was never buried there in the first place. Modern historians actually tend to think he might be buried at Comana Monastery, which is a different site that he personally founded and funded. It is also much closer to the actual battlefield where he died.
That makes more geographical sense.
Oh, we simply do not know for sure. His body just vanished. And honestly, the whole undead vampire reputation conceptually starts right there with the mysteriously missing corpse.
Speaking of the undead, let's transition and really talk about his legacy.
Yeah.
Because his bloodline, his family, did continue on after him.
Right.
He had a son named Minea.
He did, Minea the Evil.
Of course he was called that. The poisoned apple clearly does not fall very far from the impaled tree.
No, it does not. And there's also a deeply tragic family story involving his first wife during that massive 1462 Ottoman siege we talked about earlier. Local legend strongly says that as the Turkish forces surrounded Pınarı Castle, she decided she would rather die than be taken as an Ottoman captive.
So what did she do?
She threw herself off the high stone tower of the castle, plummeting down into the raging Arge River below. The local folklore quotes her as saying she would rather let the fish eat her body than the Turks.
Wow. And that specific river is actually still called the Princess's River by locals today, isn't it?
It is, yes, Ral Domne. It's a permanent geographical monument to the terror of that war. And there are other family rumors, too. Like a lost, illegitimate son who allegedly fell from a horse while the family was desperately escaping an ambush. The boy was supposedly found and quietly raised by a local humble shepherd, and Vlad only returned 14 years later to finally find him.
His life really was just endless drama and tragedy. But there is a brand new piece of this historical puzzle that literally just came out recently, right?
Right.
In 2023, some scientists got a hold of some original letters that Vlad personally wrote and handled. The actual medieval paper he physically touched and sweated on.
Yes, this is the amazing CSI forensic part of the deep dive.
Huh?
The researchers meticulously swabbed the parchment and chemically analyzed the trace proteins left behind on the paper from his hands and his skin.
And what did they find?
They discovered highly specific peptides that strongly suggest Vlad suffered from a rare medical condition called hemolacria.
Which, for those who don't have a medical degree, is what exactly?
It is a physical condition where actual human blood mixes with the fluid in the tear ducts.
Wait, so you are saying he literally cried physical tears of blood?
The modern forensic science heavily suggests that it is very, very possible.
That is just terrifying. Imagine being a peasant or a captured soldier standing before this absolute warlord. He is angrily sentencing you to die on the stake, and as he gets highly emotional or enraged, thick red blood just naturally starts running down his face.
It would have absolutely supercharged the local legends that he was somewhat supernatural or literally demonic. The peasants wouldn't understand the biology. They would just see a weeping, bleeding devil.
So if you look at all the pieces, we have the name Dracula, which meant devil to the locals. We have the unbelievable sadistic cruelty. We have the missing empty tomb. We have him literally crying tears of blood.
Hmm.
It is so incredibly easy to see exactly how the author Bram Stoker got from point A to point B and created the ultimate vampire.
But here's the most wild twist of all. Bram Stoker actually didn't know almost any of this historical stuff when he wrote the book.
Really? How is that possible?
Stoker was doing casual background research in the public reading room of the British Museum in London in the 1890s. He was already outlining a Gothic vampire novel set in Eastern Europe, and his main antagonist was originally going to be named Count Wampire.
Count Wampire. With a W.
Yeah.
That is definitely not quite as catchy as Dracula.
No, it's pretty generic. But then Stoker happened to stumble upon a relatively obscure book written by an author named William Wilkinson. The book was just a general history about the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. Stoker was skimming it, and he saw the name Dracula buried in a random footnote.
Just a footnote.
Just a footnote. And the footnote briefly explained that in the local dialect, the word Dracula translated to the devil. Stoker saw that and essentially thought, well, that's it. That is the perfect badass name for my vampire.
So he just stole a cool name. Did he actually steal the historical facts, too?
Very, very little of it. He took the name, he roughly took the exotic location, though he moved the castle to Transylvania instead of Wallachia. And he took the very vague generalized idea of a guy with a violent warrior past. But Stoker's fictional Dracula is explicitly described as a Secoli nobleman, not a Wallachian voivode.
Wow.
Stoker almost certainly didn't know anything about the night attack on the camp or the betrayal of the brother Radu or the horrifying tears of blood. He just conflated the cool-sounding name with local regional vampire folklore that he read in some travel articles.
So the deep connection between the real historical man and the famous fictional vampire is honestly almost completely accidental.
It really is. Stoker accidentally created a massive pop culture myth that basically swallowed the real historical man whole. For over a century, the Western world only ever knew the cape-wearing vampire. We had no idea about the warlord. But if you actually go to Romania, the cultural perception is totally reversed.
Right, because if you go to Bucharest today, you do not see cheap statues of a Hollywood vampire. You see grand, serious statues of a king.
A literal national hero. There is a very famous, culturally significant poem written by Mihai Eminescu, who is essentially the Romanian national poet. It's called The Third Letter, and it was written in the late 19th century. At the time, Romania was dealing with massive internal political corruption and greedy infighting.
So what does the poem say?
The poem basically aggressively calls out for the ghost of Vlad the Impaler to return to life and fix the country.
It calls for him to come back. Like, please bring back the guy who impaled 20,000 people?
Yes. The translated lines go roughly, quote, "You must come, O dread Impaler. Split them in two partitions here, the fools, the rascals there, shove them into two enclosures, then set fire to the prison and the lunatic asylum."
Wow. Just burn it all down. So to them, he clearly represents this figure of ultimate uncompromising justice. Brutal, yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
but fundamentally fair to the common man. The one guy is strong enough to clean up the terrible mess.
Exactly. To the everyday Romanians, historically, he was the only leader who was ever actually strong enough and scary enough to successfully stand up to the massive Ottoman war machine and to punish the deeply corrupt, wealthy nobles who were exploiting the peasants. He is an enduring symbol of national sovereignty and fierce independence.
It is such a fascinating duality. To the rich German merchants that he heavily taxed and brutally killed, he was the absolute monster. To the powerful Ottomans that he deeply terrified in the night, he was the literal devil. To his own vulnerable people, he was the strict but necessary protector. And to us in Hollywood, he is a guy who turns into a bat.
He is a historical Rorschach test. You essentially see in his legacy exactly what you fear the most or exactly what you secretly admire.
So as we start to wrap this whole deep dive up, what is the big final takeaway here? If we completely strip away the fake vampire cape and the plastic teeth, what are we actually left with?
I think we are left with a man who was profoundly and permanently shaped by extreme childhood trauma. A completely helpless child hostage who painfully learned that the one and only way to survive in a violent world full of wolves is to simply become the biggest, scariest wolf in the forest. He was an absolute master of tactical psychological warfare who brilliantly used calculated public horror as a strategic geopolitical tool.
And he was also, ironically, a major victim of quote-unquote fake news in a way.
He really was. And that actually perfectly brings me to a final, Very provocative thought that I want to leave everyone listening with
Oh, I
today.
love these. Let's hear it.
I want you to really think deeply about the timing of all this. Vlad happened to live and rule right at the exact moment when the mechanical printing press was first taking off and spreading across Europe. The German stories, those heavily biased, exaggerated horror pamphlets printed by his merchant enemies, were literally some of the very first mass-produced bestsellers ever printed in human history.
Yeah.
If Vlad had simply lived 50 or 100 years earlier, entirely before the invention of the printing press, those terrible stories of his cruelty might have just stayed as localized, isolated rumors in Transylvania. They wouldn't have instantly spread across all of Western Europe.
And if they don't spread?
If they don't spread to London, Bram Stoker might never have randomly found that specific name in that specific library book 400 years later.
So you were saying if not for the printing press.
If not for the printing press, Vlad Campeia might just be another totally forgotten, obscure Balkan warlord buried in a dusty academic history book somewhere. We likely might not even know the famous name Dracula at all today. The exact same new technology that completely ruined his political reputation in his own lifetime is ironically the only reason he is culturally immortal today.
That is just a wild thought to end on. He spent his whole life impaling his physical enemies, but in the end, it was the literal ink on a page that really permanently nailed him to history.
Indeed it was.
If any of you listening want to see what this terrifying, fascinating man actually looked like, and I don't mean the Bela Lugosi version, but the real historical man, go online and look up the Empress Castle portrait. It is the most famous surviving contemporary image of him.
And when you look at it, pay very close attention to his eyes. They are universally described as unusually large, piercingly green, and incredibly intense. It is very much the face of a complex man who has seen and obviously caused a tremendous amount of human suffering.
Definitely go check that portrait out. Thank you guys so much for taking this deep dive with us today, exploring the real blood and history behind the myth.
Until next time.